My daughter is hungry. Could she have your leftovers?" When the millionaire looked into her eyes, his world stopped. "Hi, my beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Your comments are like gentle hugs to my soul. You're not just part of this channel, you are its heartbeat. I thank you deeply and truly for walking this journey with me. Every story is for you, because without you, I am nothing. To those who helped us reach 25,000 followers, I bow my head in gratitude. And to our new subscribers, listen to my promise. I will never disappoint you. You will feel seen, heard, and deeply loved here. You are the stars in my darkest night, the reason these stories come to light. Please stay till the very end. You'll soon understand why this family is so special. And to my longtime warriors, remind our new ones in the comments how far we've come together. From my heart, I ask you, if these stories mean something to you, if you feel the connection, please like and comment. Let me see your light by writing, "I am here." This is more than storytelling. It's love, it's home, it's family. And I cherish you more than words can ever say. Now let's dive into today's story, with all the love in my heart. 7 years ago. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Holland penthouse, casting golden patterns across the marble floors where Becca McDonough Holland stood, her dark skin glowing in the warm light. She traced her fingers along the frame of their wedding photo, remembering the day 2 years ago when Theo had promised her the world. Today marked their 2nd anniversary, and despite the growing shadows that had begun creeping into their lives over the past 6 months, hope still bloomed in her chest like the roses in their private garden. Mrs. Holland, the soft voice of their housekeeper, Marina, broke through her reverie. "Mr. Holland asked me to give you this." She handed Becca an ivory envelope, sealed with wax bearing the Holland family crest. A tradition that had always seemed romantic before, but now felt weighted with expectation. Becca's heart fluttered as she opened it, recognizing Theo's elegant handwriting. "My beloved Becca, 2 years ago, you became my wife, my anchor, my salvation. Today, I want to show you something that will prove my love is eternal. Meet me at the Meridian Gallery at 7. Wear the blue dress, the one from our first date. Forever yours, Theo." Tears pricked her eyes. Despite everything, the cold stares from his family that had grown more frequent, the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered rooms, the subtle cruelties that had been chipping away at her confidence for months. Theo still saw her, still loved her. The Meridian Gallery buzzed with anticipation as Becca arrived, her blue silk dress flowing around her ankles. The moment she stepped inside, her breath caught. The entire space had been transformed into a private exhibition featuring every piece of art she had ever mentioned loving. Monet's water lilies, Basquiat's vibrant expressions of black identity, Frida Kahlo's raw emotional landscapes, all displayed under soft lighting that made them seem to pulse with life. "Do you like it?" Theo's voice came from behind her, warm and rich like expensive whiskey. She turned to find him holding a single white rose and a small velvet box. At 30 years old, Theo Holland commanded every room he entered with his tall frame, piercing blue eyes, and that devastating smile that had captured her heart 3 years ago when she was curating a charity auction. Tonight, however, vulnerability softened his sharp features in a way that made her heart race. "Theo, this is," she whispered, unable to finish as he dropped to one knee in the gallery's center. "I know we're already married," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She could feel in her own chest. "But I want to ask you again, here, surrounded by beauty that pales in comparison to you. Becca McDonough Holland, will you renew your vows with me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are the greatest masterpiece I've ever beheld?" Inside the box lay not a ring, but a key crafted from antique silver. "To our new home," he explained, his eyes never leaving her face. Away from the city, away from... He didn't finish, but she understood. Away from his family's increasingly hostile presence. Yes, she breathed, throwing her arms around his neck as tears of joy streamed down her face. Yes, always yes. They made love that night with desperate passion, as if they both sensed the storm clouds gathering on their horizon. Becca fell asleep with her head on Theo's chest, listening to his heartbeat, unaware that 3 blocks away, Evangeline Holland was already reviewing surveillance photographs with the cold efficiency of a general planning a war. The first sign of trouble came the next morning when Becca discovered photographers camped outside their building. Their cameras clicked frantically as she left for work, the sound like mechanical insects feeding on her discomfort. "Excuse me." She approached the nearest photographer, a thin man with predatory eyes. "Why are you taking my picture?" He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Just doing a story, Mrs. Holland, about your extracurricular activities." Her stomach clenched with dread, but she forced herself to walk normally to the subway. She couldn't let them see her fear. That would only encourage them. At the McDonough art consulting firm, the small but prestigious gallery she had built, from nothing through years of dedication and networking, her assistant Zara looked troubled. "Becca, there have been some calls. Clients asking asking if the rumors are true." "What rumors?" Becca's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Something about you meeting with men, having affairs." Zara's brown eyes filled with sympathy. "It's obviously ridiculous. Everyone who knows you knows how devoted you are to Mr. Holland. But..." Becca's world tilted on its axis. She excused herself and fled to her office, locking the door before collapsing into her chair. Her hands shook as she called Theo, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried his office, but his secretary, a woman who had always been polite before, said coldly that he was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. Meanwhile, across the city in her opulent Park Avenue office, Evangeline Holland sat reviewing the doctored photographs with Dorian, her youngest son. While Theo had inherited their father's business empire and moral compass, Dorian had inherited only Evangeline's ruthless ambition and sociopathic disregard for human suffering. "The timing needs to be perfect," Evangeline said, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon that emphasized her angular features and cold grey eyes. "First, we plant doubt, then we provide proof. By the time we're finished, Theo will thank us for opening his eyes to what that creature really is." "Mother, don't you think this is somewhat extreme?" Dorian asked, though his tone suggested he was merely playing devil's advocate rather than expressing genuine concern. "She's harmless enough. A bit uppity for her station, but harmless?" Evangeline's laugh was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "She's a virus, Dorian, a cancer that's already begun polluting our bloodline with her inferior genetics. Do you want your nephews and nieces to be mongrels? Do you want the Holland legacy diluted by street blood and ghetto mentality?" Dorian winced at the venom in his mother's voice, but nodded. He needed Evangeline's financial support to maintain his lifestyle of expensive cars and meaningless affairs, and crossing the family matriarch was a luxury he couldn't afford. What about Theo? He truly loves her. Theo is a romantic fool who thinks with his heart instead of his head. Once we show him the truth about his precious wife's character, he'll come to his senses. Evangeline's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Love is just a chemical reaction, darling, easily manipulated, easily destroyed." That evening, Becca sat in their walk-in closet still wearing her work clothes, clutching her wedding dress against her chest like armor against an invisible enemy. The photographers had followed her home, shouting questions about alleged affairs she had never had. One had even pushed a grainy photograph under her nose, an image that looked like her embracing another man in what appeared to be their apartment building's garage. But it wasn't her. The woman in the photo had similar features, but Becca could see the subtle differences that a casual observer might miss. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create this lie. "I'm not strong enough for this fight," she whispered to the wedding dress, tears staining the silk. The panic attacks had started 3 weeks ago, triggered by the constant surveillance and whispered accusations that seemed to follow her everywhere. She hadn't told Theo because she didn't want to burden him further. His relationship with his family was already strained because of their marriage, and she refused to be the reason it broke completely. She heard his key in the lock and quickly dried her tears, hanging up the dress with shaking hands that betrayed her inner turmoil. "Bakar? Where are you, sweetheart?" His voice carried exhaustion and something else, confusion, suspicion. The subtle change in his tone made her blood run cold. "Coming!" She forced brightness into her voice and emerged from the closet to find Theo sitting on their bed, holding a manila envelope with the same predatory stillness of a snake preparing to strike. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his blue eyes searching her face for something she couldn't identify. Her heart stopped. About what? He studied her with those eyes she loved so much, but now they held a distance that hadn't been there that morning. "These photos, my mother showed them to me today." The envelope contained more doctored images. Bekar entering a hotel with a man whose face was conveniently obscured by shadows. Bekar kissing someone in what appeared to be their private garage, though the lighting made identification impossible. Each image had been crafted with professional precision to suggest intimacy while maintaining plausible deniability. "Theo, these aren't real," she said, her voice breaking as she looked at the fabricated evidence of crimes she had never committed. "You have to believe me. I would never—" "I know," he said quickly, pulling her into his arms with the same fierce protectiveness that had made her fall in love with him. "I know you wouldn't, but my family, they're convinced there's truth to this. They want me to hire a private investigator." "Do it," Becca said fiercely, looking directly into his eyes with the honesty that had always been her greatest strength. "Hire 10 investigators. I have nothing to hide." Relief flooded his features like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "We'll get through this together." But as they held each other in the gathering darkness, neither of them saw the telephoto lens capturing their intimate moment through the bedroom window, or knew that Evangeline had already chosen their destroyer, a desperate father who would sell his soul to save his dying daughter. The trap was set with the precision of a master chess player thinking 20 moves ahead. The golden cage was closing around them both, and soon they would discover that love, no matter how pure, was no match for hate, backed by unlimited resources and complete moral bankruptcy. Somewhere in a small apartment across town, Jasper Crowley read his daughter a bedtime story while silently planning the destruction of an innocent woman's life. The photograph of his emaciated child served as both motivation and justification for what he was about to do. The storm was coming, and it would tear apart everything they had built. But in the ruins, something stronger would eventually grow, if they could both survive the devastation that was about to engulf them like a tsunami of manufactured lies and weaponized hatred. Chapter 2. The Servant's Lie. Years ago. 1 month later, Jasper Crowley's calloused hands trembled as he turned the page of The Little Mermaid, his daughter's favorite story. 8-year-old Rosalie lay against his chest, her once golden hair gone, leaving only the pale, translucent skin that made her look like a porcelain doll. The chemotherapy had ravaged her small body, but her spirit remained unbroken. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Will I see Mommy in heaven soon?" Jasper's throat constricted. His wife Sarah had died, bringing this precious child into the world, bleeding out on the delivery table while he held their newborn daughter. For 8 years it had been just the two of them against the world. Now that world was ending. Not. For a very long time, sweetheart, he managed, pressing his lips to her bald head. The doctors are going to make you better. But the doctors had been clear. Without the experimental treatment in Switzerland, treatment that cost $300,000, Rosalie had weeks, maybe days. Jasper's insurance had reached its lifetime maximum. His savings were exhausted. He had already sold everything of value, including Sarah's wedding ring. He was a maintenance worker at the Holland estate, earning barely enough to keep them in their tiny apartment. He had applied for loans, started crowdfunding campaigns, even swallowed his pride and asked his wealthy employers for help. Evangeline Holland had looked at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "We can't be expected to solve every employee's personal problems, Mr. Crowley," she had said, not even looking up from her manicured nails. "Perhaps you should have thought about insurance before having children." Now, as Rosalie's breathing grew more labored, Jasper felt his world crumbling. Tomorrow, the hospital would discharge her. There was nothing more they could do without payment for the treatment. The knock on his door came at midnight. Dorian Holland stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. His resemblance to Theo was superficial. Where Theo had warmth in his eyes, Dorian's were calculating and cold. "Mr. Crowley, may I come in? I have a proposition that could save your daughter's life." Jasper's heart hammered as he led Dorian into their humble living room, where medical equipment surrounded Rosalie's hospital bed. The little girl slept fitfully, her chest rising and falling with visible effort. "Beautiful child," Dorian said, but his tone was clinical, detached. "Such a shame about her condition. I understand the treatment in Switzerland could cure her completely. What do you want?" Jasper's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and desperation. Dorian opened a briefcase and removed a thick envelope and several photographs. $400,000 dollars, more than enough for your daughter's treatment and your future security. Jasper stared at the money, more cash than he had ever seen. "What's the catch?" "A simple task. You will tell my brother that you had an affair with his wife. You'll provide these photographs as evidence." Dorian spread the doctored images across their rickety coffee table. "You'll sign an affidavit detailing your relationship with Becca Holland." Jasper's stomach lurched. He had met Becca many times during his work at the estate. She was kind, always asking about Rosalie, sometimes bringing gifts for his daughter. She had even written a letter to the Children's Hospital advocating for Rosalie's care. "I can't do that to Mrs. Holland. She's a good woman. She doesn't deserve—" "Your daughter deserves to live," Dorian interrupted coldly. "Mrs. Holland will be fine. She'll receive a generous divorce settlement and move on with her life. Your daughter, however, will die without this treatment. Tonight, probably." As if summoned by his words, Rosalie began coughing, a harsh, wet sound that sent Jasper rushing to her side. Blood flecked her lips, and her eyes fluttered open, unfocused with pain. "Daddy," she whispered. "It hurts." Jasper gathered her carefully in his arms, feeling how light she had become, how fragile. "I know, baby girl, I know." Dorian watched this display with barely concealed impatience. "The offer expires at dawn, Mr. Crowley. After that, you'll never see me or this money again." After Dorian left, Jasper sat in the darkness, holding his dying daughter. He thought about Sarah, about the promises he had made at her grave to protect their child. He thought about Becca Holland's kindness, her genuine smile when she asked about Rosalie's condition. By 3 a.m., Rosalie's breathing had become so labored that Jasper called 911. As paramedics worked to stabilize her, one pulled him aside. "She's fighting, but her body is shutting down. If you have any arrangements to make, now would be the time." Jasper made his decision in that moment, watching his daughter struggle for each breath. He would save her life even if it damned his soul. The next day he found himself standing outside the Whitmore Gallery where Becca was preparing for a new exhibition. Through the window he watched her work, her movements graceful and sure as she adjusted lighting on a painting. A young artist, clearly nervous and out of place, approached her with a portfolio. Jasper saw Becca's face light up as she reviewed the work, saw her encourage the young man, saw her make a phone call that resulted in the artist weeping with joy. She had just changed someone's life with a single act of kindness, and Jasper was about to destroy her. He turned away, unable to watch anymore, and walked to the nearest church. He hadn't prayed since Sarah died, but now he fell to his knees in the empty sanctuary. God, if you're listening, forgive me. I'm about to become a monster to save my child. If there's justice in this world, let it fall on me, not on her. That evening, as Rosalie's condition worsened, Jasper practiced his lies in the bathroom mirror while she slept. Each word felt like acid in his mouth. Mrs. Holland and we began our affair 6 months ago. She said her husband didn't understand. We met at the Grandview Hotel. Tears streamed down his face as he rehearsed the script Dorian had provided. Forgive me, Mrs. Holland, he whispered to his reflection. My daughter needs her daddy to be a monster. He returned to Rosalie's bedside and held her tiny hand. Her skin was burning with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Daddy's going to save you, baby girl, he whispered, kissing her forehead, even if it costs him his soul. At dawn, as Rosalie's heart monitor began showing irregular rhythms, Jasper called Dorian Holland. I'll do it, he said, his voice dead. I'll destroy your brother's marriage. Just save my daughter. Excellent. Dorian's voice was smooth with satisfaction. The money will be in your account within the hour. Be at the estate this afternoon. Theo will be home by 6. As Jasper hung up the phone, Rosalie's eyes fluttered open. Daddy, are we going to be okay? He forced a smile, though it felt like his face might crack. Yes, sweetheart, Daddy's going to fix everything. But as he held his dying daughter and waited for the money that would save her life, Jasper Crowley knew that some things, once broken, could never truly be fixed. He was about to shatter an innocent woman's world, and the weight of that knowledge would haunt him forever. Outside their window, storm clouds gathered in the sky, as if nature itself was preparing for the devastation about to unfold. Love was about to face its greatest test, and only one heart would survive the reckoning. The die was cast, the lie was born. And somewhere across the city, Becca Holland hummed happily as she arranged flowers for a dinner that would end her marriage forever. Chapter 3. The Shattering. Years ago. The divorce. The bedroom that had once been their sanctuary now felt like a mausoleum where love lay dying. Photographs of their happiness lined the dresser, their wedding day with Becca's radiant smile, their honeymoon in Tuscany where they had made love under ancient olive trees, last Christmas morning when Becca had laughed so hard at Theo's attempt to cook breakfast that she had snorted champagne through her nose. Those images now seemed to mock them with their frozen joy, testament to a happiness that felt like it belonged to different people entirely. Theo stood rigid by their bay window, his back to her like an insurmountable wall. His shoulders were intense with the weight of betrayal he believed he carried, and when he finally turned to face her, Becca gasped at what she saw. This wasn't her husband. This was a broken man with hollow eyes, and grief etched into every line of his face like scars from an invisible war. Tell me it's not true. His voice was barely human, roughened by 3 hours of listening to Jasper Crowley's carefully rehearsed lies and studying fabricated evidence with forensic intensity. Tell me you didn't betray everything we built together. Becca sat on their bed at 5 months pregnant, her rounded belly now obvious beneath the silk nightgown he had bought her in Paris. She had been planning to share the pregnancy news properly tonight, with dinner and candles and joy. Instead, her unborn child had become a witness to the destruction of their marriage. "What are you talking about? Betray what? Theo, you're scaring me." Her voice carried genuine confusion and growing terror as she watched the man she loved transform into someone she didn't recognize. He turned then, and she saw devastation in his eyes, the complete destruction of everything he had believed about their life together. In his hands was a manila envelope, thick with condemnation and professionally crafted lies. "Jasper Crowley came to see me today." Each word fell like a hammer blow against her heart. "He told me about your affair, about the hotels, about the lies you've been feeding me for months while I defended you to my family." "Affair?" Becca struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making her movements awkward. "Theo, I don't know what he told you, but 6 months, Becca." Theo's voice cracked, like ice breaking under pressure. "Right when you got pregnant. He said the affair started 6 months ago. He knew details about you that only a lover would know." Becca's mind reeled with horror and understanding. The timeline was deliberate. They wanted Theo to believe the baby wasn't his. "Theo, he's lying. I swear on our unborn child's life, I have never been unfaithful to you. This baby is yours." Theo threw the envelope at her feet with violent force, its contents spilling across their Persian rug like evidence of her guilt. Doctored photographs showed her in embraces with a man whose face was always obscured by shadows or camera angles. Hotel receipts bore her forged signature, dated to coincide with her early pregnancy. Love letters, written in script that experts would later identify as a perfect match to hers, detailed passionate encounters during the exact weeks their child was conceived. Becca dropped to her knees despite her pregnancy, gathering the fabricated evidence with shaking hands, her wedding ring catching the lamplight like a mockery of their vows. "These aren't real. Theo, look at me. Look at your pregnant wife and tell me you believe I could do this to us." But when she looked up, with tears streaming down her face, his eyes were already dead to her, cold and distant as winter stars. "I trusted you with everything. My heart, my future, my dreams of having children with you and growing old together, and you threw it all away for him." "No!" The word tore from her throat like a scream. She struggled to stand, her pregnant belly making her vulnerable and clumsy. "Theo, please, someone is doing this to us. Your family, they never wanted us together. This baby is yours. Look at the dates. I was already pregnant when these alleged affairs supposedly started." "The affair could have started earlier, Theo," he said coldly, his voice carrying a finality that made her blood freeze. "Maybe you got pregnant by him and tried to pass the child off as mine." "Don't." Her voice broke completely. "Don't you dare question the paternity of our child. This baby was conceived in love, in our bed, the night we celebrated our 2nd anniversary." But Theo's face was stone, carved from marble and just as cold. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Those words broke something fundamental inside. Becca, not just her heart, but her entire conception of reality. She felt it snap like a bone, the sound echoing through her soul as she clutched her pregnant belly protectively. "Get out," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a judge delivering a death sentence. "Pack your things and get out of my house." "Our house," she whispered, looking around at the room where they had shared their most intimate moments. "This is our home, Theo. We're having a baby together. You can't just—" "That remains to be seen," Theo interrupted, his words like knives cutting through her remaining hope. "DNA tests will determine the truth after the birth." "You want a DNA test?" Becca's voice rose with desperate fury. "Fine, we'll do it right now. There are prenatal tests, and risk harming the child if it is mine." "No. But the moment that baby is born, we'll know the truth." The words hung in the air like a curse, poisoning the very atmosphere of their sanctuary. Becca felt something. Inside her die, not just her marriage, but her faith in the man she had trusted with her heart. For the next week, as lawyers circled like vultures and paperwork was prepared, Becca moved through their home like a ghost. The pregnancy made everything harder. Morning sickness that left her weak, back pain that made sleep impossible, and the constant weight of growing a child whose father had rejected them both. Evangeline Holland took charge of the divorce proceedings with military precision, having anticipated this moment for months and prepared for it like a general planning a siege. The prenuptial agreement Becca had signed in a haze of love and trust became her executioner, every clause crafted to ensure she would leave the marriage with nothing. "She gets nothing," Evangeline announced to their family lawyer with undisguised satisfaction. "The adultery clause voids any claim to alimony or property settlement, and if that child isn't Theo's, she'll owe us for emotional distress." They took everything with systematic cruelty. The jewelry Theo had given her during their courtship and marriage, including her grandmother's wedding ring that he had surprised her with on their first anniversary. The art collection she had curated with love and expertise. The clothes in her closet, since they had been purchased with Holland money. The final confrontation came on a rain-soaked Thursday in November, the sky weeping tears that Becca could no longer shed. Security guards, men who had once nodded respectfully when she passed, now stood ready to escort her from the estate like a criminal. Becca stood in the marble foyer holding a single battered suitcase, her pregnancy now unmistakably obvious at nearly 6 months. The grandeur of the space mocked her. Crystal chandeliers that had once welcomed her home now looked down like glittering judges. Theo watched from the stairs, his face impassive as a statue's. Evangeline stood beside him, her triumph barely concealed behind a mask of feigned regret. "I'm sorry it had to end this way, dear," Evangeline said with false sympathy, "but surely you understand that actions have consequences." Becca ignored her completely, focusing all her remaining strength on Theo. "I know you can't hear me anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But I need you to know that every moment of our marriage was real for me. Every kiss, every promise, every dream we shared. It was all real." Something flickered in Theo's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of the love that had once lived there. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "This baby is yours, Theo," she said, placing both hands on her rounded belly. "No matter what lies they've told you, no matter what fake evidence they've shown you, this child was created from our love. When you hold our baby in your arms, you'll know the truth." She walked toward the massive oak doors, then paused at the threshold. "I'll be waiting for that DNA test, because when it proves this baby is yours, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you threw away your pregnant wife based on lies." But as the massive oak doors of the Holland estate closed behind her forever, with a sound like the gates of heaven slamming shut, Becca collapsed on the rain-soaked steps. At 5 months pregnant and completely alone, she pressed her hands to her belly and made a promise to her unborn child. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered into the rain. "But I'll protect you. I'll raise you with enough love for both parents, and someday, when Daddy learns the truth, he'll come looking for us." Inside the mansion, Theo stood at his window, watching her broken form on the security monitor. His hand moved toward the intercom button twice, but he never pressed it. Love was dead, buried beneath the weight of lies he believed were truth, and somewhere across the city, Jasper Crowley held his daughter, now healthy and alive thanks to Swiss doctors and blood money, and wept for the innocent woman whose life he had destroyed, and for the unborn child who would grow up fatherless because of his lies. The storm raged on, washing the city clean of everything except guilt, and 3 lives were forever changed by a deception so carefully crafted it felt more real than truth. Chapter 4. Desperate Hearts. Years, 7 months ago. Single motherhood. The charity hospital room smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Becca McDonough. She had legally changed her name back, unable to bear the weight of Holland any longer, gripped the bed rails as another contraction ripped through her body. At 32 weeks pregnant, her daughter was coming too early, triggered by months of stress, poor nutrition, and sleeping in her car. "The baby's coming whether we're ready or not," Dr. Patricia Chen said gently, checking Becca's cervix. She was the only doctor at Mercy General who didn't look at Becca with judgment when she admitted she had no insurance, no money, and no husband. Becca had been living in her Honda Civic for 4 months, ever since being evicted from the apartment she could no longer afford. She had sold everything of value piece by piece, her designer clothes, her college textbooks, even her engagement ring from a pawn shop for grocery money. But somehow she had kept herself and her baby alive. "I can't afford this," Becca gasped between contractions. "The NICU, the surgery—" "Right now, let's focus on getting your baby here safely," Dr. Chen interrupted. "We'll worry about the bills later." Magnolia Rose McDonough entered the world fighting, her tiny lungs struggling to process oxygen they weren't designed to handle yet. She weighed 2 pounds, 4 ounces, and her skin was so translucent, Becca could see her daughter's heart beating through her chest. "She's beautiful," Becca whispered through tears as the NICU team prepared to take her daughter away. "She's perfect." For 2 months, Becca lived in the hospital like a ghost. She slept in uncomfortable chairs in the NICU waiting room, showered in the family bathroom when nurses weren't looking, and ate whatever free food she could find in the cafeteria. Her entire world consisted of an incubator, monitors, and the sound of her daughter fighting for life. "Mommy's here, Angel," she would whisper through the glass, pressing her palm against the clear barrier. "You're my little warrior. We're going to get through this together." The medical bills mounted into the hundreds of thousands. Social workers tried to discuss options for placement, suggesting that a premature baby with ongoing medical needs might be better served in a home with resources. Becca refused every conversation. "She's mine," she told them firmly. "I'll figure it out." When Magnolia was finally strong enough to leave the hospital at 4 months old, weighing barely 5 pounds, Becca faced a new reality. She couldn't live in her car with a medically fragile infant. The social workers were watching, ready to step in if they deemed her situation unfit. She found a studio apartment in the worst part of town for $400 a month. Paid for with money, she made cleaning office buildings at night, while Magnolia slept in a carrier strapped to her chest. During the day, she cleaned houses while her daughter played quietly in corners, having learned early that survival meant being invisible. The morning she met Quinton Ashworth, she was operating on 3 hours of sleep and pure maternal desperation. 2-month-old Magnolia was fussy from an ear infection, and Becca was juggling her crying daughter, a diaper bag, and the embarrassment of having her credit card declined at the pharmacy. "I can try again," she told the pharmacist, knowing her account was empty but hoping for a miracle. "Please, she needs this antibiotic." "Mum," the card was declined. "Do you have cash?" Becca's eyes filled with tears as Magnolia's cries grew louder. $17.32 was all she had until her next cleaning job that evening. "I'll pay for it," the voice came from behind her in line. Becca turned to see a well-dressed man in his early 30s, handsome in a calculated way that suggested he understood his own appeal. His expensive suit and confident posture marked him as someone who had never worried about declined credit cards or sick babies he couldn't afford to treat. You don't have to, Becca started. It's just medicine for a baby, Quinton Ashworth said, handing his platinum card to the pharmacist. No child should suffer because of money. Becca stared at him in disbelief as he paid the $47 prescription without hesitation. Thank you, I don't know how to repay. You don't need to repay anything, he said, studying her with interest that made her uncomfortable. What's your name? Becca. Becca McDonough. And this is Magnolia. Beautiful name for a beautiful baby, he said. But his eyes weren't on Magnolia. They were cataloguing Becca's desperation with the precision of someone who understood weakness. I'm Quinton Ashworth, and you look like someone who could use a friend. What Becca didn't know was that Quinton had been watching her struggle for weeks. He had seen her pushing Magnolia's second-hand stroller through his upscale neighborhood, where she cleaned houses, had noticed her careful thrift store, clothes and the way she counted change before buying groceries. She was exactly what he had been looking for, a woman desperate enough to be grateful for rescue. Over the following weeks, Quinton appeared in her life like salvation. He brought groceries when her refrigerator was empty, paid for Magnolia's pediatric visits when bills overwhelmed her, and listened with apparent sympathy as she edited her story to hide the worst of her shame. I was married before, she told him during their first coffee date while Magnolia slept in her stroller. My husband left when he found out about the baby. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She couldn't bear to admit that her ex-husband had accused her of adultery and demanded DNA tests to prove paternity. What kind of man abandons his pregnant wife? Quinton asked with perfect indignation. You and Magnolia deserve so much better. He studied her like a master manipulator studies prey, learning her vulnerabilities with scientific precision, her desperate need for security after months of uncertainty, her terror of losing Magnolia to social services, her longing for someone to share the overwhelming responsibility of raising a medically fragile child alone. But what truly sealed his interest was the day he overheard her on the phone with a bill collector, using the name McDonough when a legal document clearly addressed to Becca Holland had fallen from her purse. A quick internet search revealed everything: the society wedding, the scandal, the very public divorce from one of the city's most powerful families. Becca Holland wasn't just any desperate single mother. She was the ex-wife of Theo Holland, a woman who had once moved in the highest social circles, who had connections in the art world that could be valuable to his struggling business. A woman who had lost everything and would be grateful to anyone who offered her stability. I know you've been hurt, Quinton said during their third month of carefully orchestrated courtship, his voice carrying exactly the right mixture of understanding and strength. I know you think you're broken, but I see the beautiful woman you really are, Becca. I see your strength, your intelligence, your incredible capacity for love. I come with complications, Becca warned him, looking down at Magnolia, who was now a healthy 6-month-old with bright blue eyes and a stubborn chin. Medical bills, sleepless nights, a daughter who will always come first. I want to be part of your family, Quinton said with perfect sincerity. Both of you. Let me take care of you the way you deserve. When he proposed 3 months later with a modest diamond ring, Becca stared at her reflection in his bathroom mirror afterward. She didn't love Quinton. Not the way she had loved Theo, with every cell of her being singing his name. But love had destroyed her, left her bleeding on divorce papers, while the man who had promised to cherish her moved on with his life. Maybe practicality would save her where passion had failed. I need stability for Magnolia, she whispered to her reflection, touching the small diamond that represented security rather than love. I need someone who won't abandon us. On their wedding night in a modest hotel room, Becca lay awake staring at the ceiling while Quinton slept beside her. Magnolia was in her crib next to the bed, breathing peacefully for the first time in months without the fear of eviction or empty cupboards. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever God had sent Quinton to save them. She didn't notice the satisfied smile that crossed her new husband's face in the darkness. What she also didn't notice was the way Quinton's eyes lingered on legal documents, calculating Magnolia's birth date against standard pregnancy timelines. Noting the blue eyes that looked nothing like his own brown ones, he suspected from the beginning that this child wasn't his biological daughter. But that was perfect. A woman with secrets was easier to control, and Theo Holland's daughter would be a useful card to play if he ever needed leverage against one of the most powerful families in the city. "Tomorrow we start our new life together," he murmured, but his eyes were cold with planning rather than warm with love. Outside their window, rain began to fall like tears from heaven, as if the world itself was mourning the end of Beeka's hope. For true love and the beginning of a marriage built on desperation and carefully hidden deception. Chapter 5. The Second Betrayal. Years ago, after Magnolia's birth, the contraction ripped through Baker's body like lightning at 32 weeks, doubling her over in the middle of Ashworth Logistics warehouse, where she had been updating inventory records despite her doctor's warnings about stress and overwork. Her water broke with a gush that soaked through her maternity pants and pooled on the concrete floor, 8 weeks before their daughter was supposed to make her entrance into the world. "Call 911, she gasped to Jerome, the warehouse supervisor, who looked terrified at the sight of blood mixed with amniotic fluid. Beeka had been working 12-hour days despite her high-risk pregnancy status, driven by Quinton's relentless demands that she earn her keep, and his constant reminders that her medical bills were already straining their finances. "The babies, coming too early," she whispered, clutching her swollen belly as another wave of pain crashed over her. At 32 weeks, her daughter wasn't ready for the world outside the womb, but the world was demanding her arrival anyway. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical terminology she couldn't understand through her pain. "Premature rupture of membranes," the paramedic radioed to the hospital. "Possible placental abruption. ETA 5 minutes. Quinton met them at the emergency room, but his face showed controlled irritation rather than the concern of an expectant father. "How much is this going to cost?" were his first words to Dr. Martinez. Not, "Is my wife okay?" or, "Will the baby survive?" "So we need to focus on saving both your wife and child right now," Dr. Martinez replied firmly, his professional composure barely concealing his disgust at Quinton's priorities. "We can discuss financial arrangements later." Magnolia Ashworth entered the world weighing 2 pounds, 3 ounces, her tiny lungs struggling to process oxygen they weren't designed to handle yet. She was so small that Becca's wedding ring could slide over her entire hand like a bracelet, so fragile that her skin was translucent enough to see the delicate network of veins that carried life through her premature body. "She's beautiful," Becca whispered through tears as the NICU team rushed her daughter away in an incubator that looked like a spacecraft designed to sustain life in hostile environments. "She's perfect," but Quinton stared at the incubator with unconcealed disgust, his mask of concerned husband slipping for the first time since their marriage. "She's defective," he said coldly, his voice carrying no warmth or paternal affection. "Look at her, all those wires and machines. She's going to cost us thousands of dollars a day, and for what? She might not even be normal." Becca felt something fundamental die inside her chest, a piece of hope she hadn't realized she was still carrying. "She's fighting for her life, Quinton. She's our daughter." "She's a burden," he snapped, his true nature finally emerging under stress. "Maybe it would be better if she didn't make it. Save us all the trouble and expense." Those words hung in the sterile hospital air like a curse, poisoning the space where new life was supposed to bring joy. Bekar stared at the man she had married, seeing him clearly for the first time without the filter of desperation that had made her accept his proposal. For the next 2 months, Bekar lived in the NICU like a resident ghost. She slept in uncomfortable chairs that left her back aching and her neck permanently stiff, at vending machine food when she remembered to eat at all, and spent every possible moment talking to her daughter through the incubator glass. "Mommy's here, little angel," she would whisper, pressing her palm against the clear plastic barrier. "You're my miracle baby, my little fighter. I know you're scared, but you're going to be okay. We're going to be okay." Magnolia responded to her mother's voice in ways that amazed the nursing staff. Her tiny fingers would grasp toward the sound even when her eyes couldn't open, and her vital signs would improve dramatically during Becca's visits. The nurses said it was remarkable how she seemed to calm whenever Becca spoke, how her breathing would stabilize and her heart rate would steady. Quinton rarely visited, and when he did, it was only to complain about the mounting medical bills, or to pressure Becca to make what he called realistic decisions about their daughter's future. "She's been on life support for 6 weeks, he said during one particularly cruel visit, his voice carrying the cold calculation of someone discussing a failed business investment. "How long are we supposed to bankrupt ourselves for someone who might not even survive, let alone be normal?" "She's getting stronger every day," Becca protested, her voice fierce with maternal protection. "The doctors say her lung function is improving. She opened her eyes yesterday and looked right at me." "Probably brain damage from oxygen deprivation," Quinton replied dismissively, crushing her hope with surgical precision. "Even if she lives, she'll likely be disabled. Is that the life you want for us? Taking care of a vegetable while I work myself to death paying medical bills?" Bekar's hands clenched into fists, her wedding ring cutting into her finger. "Get out!" "What?" I said. "Get out of this hospital. Don't come back here unless you're prepared to be a father to our daughter." But Quinton's cruelty was just beginning. While Magnolia fought for her life surrounded by machines and miracles, he brought other women to their home, sometimes his secretary Rebecca, sometimes female clients, sometimes random women he picked up at bars who giggled at his jokes and didn't ask about the baby pictures on his desk. He didn't bother hiding his infidelity. In fact, he seemed to enjoy flaunting it as punishment for Becca's divided attention. The day she caught him was the day she had rushed home to shower and change clothes before returning to her daughter's bedside. She found them in her bed, Quinten, and a young blonde who couldn't have been older than 22. The girl was wearing Becca's wedding dress. "Oh my God!" The girl giggled when she saw Becca standing frozen in the doorway. "You didn't tell me she was so pathetic looking." "No. Wonder you're trading up to someone younger." Quinton didn't even have the decency to look ashamed or attempt to cover himself. "Bekar, meet Crystal. Crystal, this is my soon-to-be ex-wife who spends all her time at the hospital instead of taking care of her husband's needs." "He told me all about you," Crystal continued, adjusting the silk fabric of the dress with deliberate cruelty. "About how you can't even keep a baby healthy. How pathetic is that? What kind of woman can't even do the one thing women are supposed to be good at?" Becca's vision went red with a fury she had never experienced before. "Get out of my dress," she said quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous calm. "Make me." Crystal, taunted, emboldened by Quinton's presence. "Quinn says you're too weak to fight for anything you want. That's why your first husband threw you away like garbage." What happened next surprised everyone, including Becca herself. She lunged forward and grabbed the wedding dress, tearing it off the girl's body with a strength born of pure maternal fury and 2 months of watching her daughter fight for life. "This dress represents my vows to protect my daughter," she snarled, as Crystal scrambled away, screaming, "and I will die before I let anyone mock that." Crystal fled the house half naked and shrieking obscenities, while Quinton watched with amused detachment, as if Becca had just provided entertainment rather than defending her most sacred promises. "Feeling better now?" he asked, as if she had. "Just had a minor tantrum instead of standing up for everything she held dear." "You're sick," Becca whispered, clutching the torn dress to her chest. "Our daughter is fighting for her life, and you're playing house with children." "Our daughter is a mistake," Quinton replied with casual cruelty, "just like this marriage turned out to be." The final betrayal came 3 weeks later, on a night when 18-month-old Magnolia was home from the hospital, but suffering from an ear infection that made her cry constantly despite antibiotics. Bakar had been up for 36 hours straight, alternating between work and caring for their daughter, when the demands of single motherhood while married became too much to bear. "I can't take this anymore," Quinton announced, throwing clothes into expensive luggage with the efficiency of someone who had been planning this moment. "The crying, the medical bills, the constant drama. This isn't the life I signed up for when I married you." "What are you talking about?" Becca asked, rocking Magnolia gently while her heart began to race with recognition of abandonment patterns. "She's just sick. Babies get ear infections. The doctor said, 'I'm leaving, Becca. I'm done playing house with damaged goods.'" His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing a business decision rather than destroying a family. "You can't just leave. She's your daughter. I'm your wife. We made vows I never meant," he interrupted, throwing legal papers on their kitchen table. "Divorce papers. I'm citing abandonment and emotional distress. My lawyer says I can get out of paying child support since the kid was born defective due to your negligence during pregnancy." Bakar stared at the papers in disbelief, her world tilting off its axis. "Negligence! I followed every doctor's order. I took my vitamins. I went to every appointment. I did everything right." "You worked too hard, stressed yourself out, caused the premature birth. That's negligence, according to my attorney." His voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had planned this conversation in advance. "Where will we go? We don't have any money saved. And with her medical needs, that's not my problem anymore." Quinton hefted his suitcase with the satisfaction of a man shedding unwanted responsibility. "I've emptied our joint accounts and liquidated our shared assets. Sold your grandmother's jewelry too. Got an excellent price for those antique pieces." Becca's heart stopped. "My grandmother's jewelry. Those were the only things I had left from my family. You had no right. I had every right as your husband. We needed the money for my fresh start with someone who appreciates what I have to offer." He paused at the door, his face twisted with contempt that had been building for months. "Take your broken child and get out. You've ruined my life long enough. Don't come looking for me. I never want to see either of you again." The front door slammed with a finality that echoed through their empty apartment like a death knell. Becca found the note he'd left on the kitchen counter, written on their wedding stationery in his precise handwriting. "Becca, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've taken what I need for my new life. The rent is paid through the end of the month, then you're on your own. Don't contact me, don't try to find me, don't expect any help. You made your choice when you decided to keep that broken child. Now live with the consequences. The car is repossessed as of tomorrow morning. Q." Becca sank to the kitchen floor, still holding feverish Magnolia, and released a scream of anguish that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. The sound was so raw, so primal, that it woke neighbors 3 apartments away and brought Mrs. Chen from next door, running to check if someone was being murdered. "I failed you, sweetheart," she sobbed into Magnolia's soft hair. "Mommy failed you again." But as she held her daughter, this tiny, perfect miracle who had fought so hard to live despite being unwanted by her father, Becca felt something new stirring in her chest. Not hope, exactly, but determination forged in the fire of abandonment, and tempered by maternal love. "We don't need him, baby girl," she whispered, her tears falling onto Magnolia's cheek. We never needed him. It's just you and me now, and I promise you this. I will never let anyone make you feel less than perfect ever again." Outside their window, storm clouds gathered like an omen of the struggles ahead. But inside that modest apartment, a mother's love burned brighter than any darkness, and a little girl, who had already survived the impossible, continued to fight for the life her father had abandoned. Chapter 6. Rock Bottom. Present day. The cardboard castle behind Murphy's strip mall had been home for 6 weeks now, constructed from boxes Becca had rescued from the dumpster and reinforced with duct tape and determination. She had decorated it with wildflowers growing through cracks in the asphalt and bottle caps that caught the sunlight like stained glass, turning their makeshift shelter into what she called Magnolia's palace. At 3 years old, Magnolia had never known true stability, but she possessed an unshakable optimism that broke Becca's heart daily, while simultaneously keeping it beating. "Mommy, look!" Magnolia held up a dandelion she had picked from the parking lot, her small face glowing with the joy of discovery. "It's a princess flower. It's beautiful, baby," Becca whispered, accepting the wilted stem like it was spun from gold. Her daughter's ability to find beauty in the smallest things, a discarded stuffed animal with one eye missing, a pretty bottle cap, a crack in the concrete that looked like a smile, reminded Becca that wonder could exist even in hell. Their routine was survival distilled to its cruel essence. Becca worked as a night janitor at 3 different office buildings while Magnolia slept curled against her chest in a baby carrier she had bought second-hand. During the day, she cleaned houses while Magnolia played quietly in corners, having learned early that good children stayed invisible and silent. When clients weren't looking, Becca would steal small things: crackers from pantries, soap from bathrooms, sometimes an apple from a fruit bowl if Magnolia looked particularly pale. These tiny thefts felt like crimes against her soul, but they kept them alive when everything else failed. The guilt of those small betrayals ate at Becca's conscience. Every day, she had once been a woman who returned extra change at stores, who would drive across town to return a wallet she'd found. Now she palmed packets of crackers from wealthy women's kitchens while their backs were turned, her fingers trembling with shame and necessity. The hardest part was watching Magnolia's innocence slowly adapt to their reality. At 3, she had already learned to be grateful for scraps, to never ask for anything, to comfort her mother when despair became too heavy to carry alone. It was a childhood stolen piece by piece, and Becca carried that guilt like shards of glass in her chest. "Ah, you said again, Mommy," Magnolia would ask when she found Becca staring into space, lost in memories of warm beds and full refrigerators and a time when tomorrow held promise instead of dread. "No, sweetheart, Mummy's just thinking about the sad prince." Becca's heart clenched. Somehow, through all the careful editing of bedtime stories, Magnolia had absorbed the truth about her mother's broken heart. In their fairy tales, there was always a sad prince who had lost his princess because bad people told lies, and the princess had to find her own way in the world. "Maybe," Becca admitted, "but it doesn't matter anymore. It's just us, and that's perfect." "Will the sad prince find us someday?" "I don't know, baby. Probably not." But Magnolia, with the faith that only children possess, smiled anyway. "That's okay. We have our castle." The castle was falling apart. Rain leaked through holes in the cardboard, and they huddled together on December nights, sharing body heat under a thin blanket Becca had found in a dumpster. The blanket smelled of other people's lives, cigarettes and perfume, and the particular sadness of discarded things. But it was warm, and warmth was precious as diamonds. When Magnolia developed a persistent cough that wouldn't respond to over-the-counter medicine, Becca sold her blood plasma twice in 1 week to pay for antibiotics. The plasma center had become as familiar as a second home, with nurses who knew her by name and pretended not to notice how often she returned. The plasma center nurse, a kind woman named Dolores, worried about Becca's frequent visits. "Honey, you can't keep doing this. You're already underweight and your iron levels are concerning." "I'm fine," Becca lied, though she had fainted twice recently from malnutrition and dehydration. "What about government assistance? Food stamps? Housing? Vouchers?" Becca had tried everything. The waiting lists were years long, and without a permanent address, most programs wouldn't accept her applications. The shelter system was overcrowded and dangerous. She had seen too many children disappear, too many women brutalized by systems that were supposed to protect them. Their lowest moment came during a heatwave in July when Magnolia's cough worsened into pneumonia. Becca carried her daughter's burning body to the emergency room, where they waited for 6 hours before being seen. "Please," she begged Dr. Morrison, an exhausted resident who looked barely older than herself. "I'll work for free. I'll clean the hospital for a year. Just help her breathe." Dr. Morrison's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Magnolia's labored breathing. "We'll treat her. We have to. But the bills—" "I don't care about the bills. Just save my baby." Magnolia survived, but the medical debt destroyed what little financial stability they had managed to build. The bills followed them everywhere. To the library where Magnolia learned to read, to the fast food restaurants where Becca begged for leftover food, to the plasma center where she continued selling her blood to buy her daughter's medications. As autumn turned to winter, their situation became critical. Magnolia's shoes had holes that let in cold and water, and she was constantly sick from exposure. Becca watched her daughter share her last graham cracker with a stray cat and realized they were both slowly dying. "Mommy's tired," Magnolia said one December evening, crawling into their cardboard shelter. At 3 years old, she was too thin, too pale, too quiet. The bright spark that had carried them through their darkest days was finally dimming. "I know, sweetheart. Me too. Are we going to see God soon, like the angels in our stories?" The question hit Becca like a physical blow. Her 3-year-old daughter was asking about death with the casual acceptance of someone who had never known. Security. "No, baby. We're not going anywhere. Mommy's going to figure this out." But how? She had pawned everything of value months ago. Her grandmother's ring, the last piece of her previous life, had gone to pay for Magnolia's antibiotics. She had applied for every job that would take someone without a permanent address, but most employers took one look at her appearance and found reasons to decline. The night that changed everything started like any other nightmare. Magnolia was burning with another fever, her 4th this month, and Becca had been without food for 3 days, giving every scrap to her daughter. She felt dizzy and weak, her vision swimming with black spots that warned of imminent collapse. Just this once, she prayed to whatever God might be listening. "If you exist, if you have any mercy left for us, just this once, help me save my child." She found herself on 5th Avenue, staring through the windows of restaurants where people in expensive clothes enjoyed meals that cost more than she made in a week. The warm light spilling onto the sidewalk felt like mockery, but it also felt like hope. One restaurant looked familiar, though she couldn't place why through her fever-induced haze. A man sat alone at a window table, barely touching his meal, while staring into space with the same haunted expression she saw in mirrors. Becca didn't recognize the restaurant as Meridian, where she and Theo had celebrated their first anniversary. She didn't recognize the familiar slope of the man's shoulders or the way he held his wine glass. She was too broken, too desperate, too focused on the untouched bread on his plate. All she saw was food, food that could save her daughter's life. With Magnolia burning with fever in her arms, Becca approached the window. She knocked gently on the glass, her hand shaking from malnutrition and desperation. The man looked up, and for a moment the world stopped. But Becca was too far gone to process what she was seeing. She only knew that this stranger had food, and her baby was dying. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered through the glass, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry to bother you, but may I have your leftovers, sir?" The man's wine glass fell from his hands, shattering on the restaurant floor like her heart had shattered 7 years ago, but Becca didn't hear it break. She was too busy watching her daughter's eyes flutter closed, too busy feeling Magnolia's burning forehead against her chest. "Please," she whispered again, not recognizing the face that had haunted her dreams for 7 years. "My baby needs food." And in that moment, as their eyes met through glass and 7 years of pain, two broken hearts began to remember what it felt like to love. Chapter 7. Recognition and Reckoning. Present day, the reunion. Theo Holland sat at table 17 of Meridian Restaurant, the same table where he and Becca had celebrated their first anniversary 7 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him that he came here every November 15th to torture himself with memories of the woman who had vanished like smoke after their divorce. The lobster thermidor on his plate, Becca's favorite dish, the one she had declared food for the gods, while laughing so hard she had snorted champagne, remained untouched, growing cold as he stared into his wine glass. The restaurant buzzed with life around him, couples sharing intimate dinners, business associates closing deals over expensive bottles of wine, families celebrating milestones. But Theo existed in a bubble of solitude surrounded by ghosts of happier times. He could still hear Becca's laughter echoing off these walls, still see her eyes sparkling in the candlelight as she told him about her latest gallery discovery. "Mr. Holland?" The young waiter Jeremy approached hesitantly. He had served Theo's annual pilgrimage of grief for 3 years now and had learned to tread carefully around his melancholy patron. "Would you like me to box your meal? You haven't touched—" "Leave it," Theo said quietly, his voice rough with unshed tears. At 37, he commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals with a few words, but he couldn't summon the strength to eat a simple meal. Across from him sat Dashiell Kane, his private investigator, delivering the same report Theo had heard dozens of times before. "Still no trace, Mr. Holland. It's like she vanished completely after the divorce. No employment records, no address changes, no digital footprint whatsoever." Theo's fingers tightened around his wine glass until his knuckles went white. 7 years of searching, 7 years of hiring the best investigators money could buy, 7 years of checking every hospital, every shelter, every morgue in the country. Becca McDonough had simply ceased to exist. "She could have changed her name completely," Dashiell continued gently. "Left the country, started over somewhere we can't reach. Perhaps it's time to accept that she doesn't want to be found." "She's alive," Theo said with the desperate certainty of a man clinging to hope. "I would know if she wasn't. I would feel it." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front entrance. The maître d' Philippe was moving quickly toward the door where a disheveled woman carrying a child had somehow slipped past the hostess. Several patrons looked up with expressions of distaste and alarm, their expensive evening disrupted by what appeared to be a homeless person seeking charity. Theo glanced up irritably, annoyed by the disruption of his private grief, and his world shattered into a million pieces. Those eyes, dear God in heaven, those eyes! The wine glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a crystalline crash that echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. 7 years collapsed into a single heartbeat as he stared at the woman who had haunted every moment of his existence since she walked out of his life. But this wasn't the Becca he remembered. This woman was skeletal, her cheekbones sharp with malnutrition, her once lustrous hair choppy and dull. Her clothes hung on her emaciated frame like rags, and her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that had once sparkled with intelligence and warmth, were hollow with the kind of desperation that came from fighting a losing battle against the world. She was dying. Theo could see it in every line of her body, in the way she swayed on her feet, in the grey pallor of her skin. "Becca!" The word escaped his lips like a prayer torn from his soul. She staggered backward, clutching the child more tightly. To her chest, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The little girl, she couldn't be more than 3, turned to look at him with fever-bright eyes, and Theo's heart stopped completely. The child had Becca's dark skin and delicate bone structure, but her eyes were his. That exact shade of blue that had marked every Holland male for generations, and her chin, stubborn and determined, was a perfect miniature of his own. "Please," Becca whispered, backing toward the door as every eye in the restaurant tracked her movement. "I'll leave. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I wouldn't have—" But even as she spoke, her legs were giving out. 7 years of struggle, 3 days without food, and the shock of seeing him again combined into a perfect storm that sent her crashing toward the marble floor in a dead faint. Theo moved without conscious thought, reaching her before her head could hit the unforgiving stone. As he gathered her unconscious form in his arms, the little girl looked up at him with those impossibly familiar eyes. "Are you the prince from Mommy's stories?" she asked, in a voice that was pure music despite her obvious illness. "The one who made her cry?" The words hit him like physical blows. Theo couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the devastating realization that this child was his daughter, and he had never known she existed. "Mommy tells me about you sometimes," the little girl continued, her small hand reaching out to touch his face with unconscious trust. "She says you live far away, and that bad people made you forget us." "What's your name, sweetheart?" Theo managed to whisper. "Magnolia," she said proudly. "Mommy says it's a pretty name. How old are you, Magnolia?" 3, she said, then coughed, a harsh, wet sound that sent panic racing through his veins. "Mommy says I'm a big girl, 3 years old." The timeline fit perfectly. This child had been conceived during their marriage, probably around the time of the fabricated affair. Becca had been pregnant when she left, pregnant with his child, and she had raised their daughter alone in poverty while he lived in luxury, believing lies. "Sir, should I call an ambulance?" Philippe asked nervously, clearly wanting this disturbance removed from his pristine establishment. "Yes," Theo said hoarsely, "and clear a path to the door, now." As they waited for the paramedics, Magnolia began to cough more violently. Her fever was dangerously high, her breathing labored. "She's been sick," Becca whispered, consciousness returning in fragments. "I don't have money for a doctor." "Shh," Theo murmured, smoothing her matted hair back from her face. "It's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of both of you." "No," Becca struggled weakly against his arms. "You can't. She's not. You didn't want—" "She's mine," Theo said with absolute certainty. "She has my eyes, Becca. She's mine, isn't she?" Becca's face crumpled. "You threw us away," she whispered. "You looked at me like I was garbage and threw us away." "I thought you had betrayed me. I never betrayed you," Becca said, her voice gaining strength even as tears streamed down her gaunt cheeks. "Not once, not ever. I loved you more than my own life, and you destroyed us based on lies." The paramedics arrived then, efficiently loading both Becca and Magnolia onto gurneys. As they prepared to transport them to the hospital, Magnolia reached out her small hand toward Theo. "Are you coming with us? Mommy needs someone to help her." Theo took her tiny fingers in his much larger ones, feeling the delicate bones that seemed as fragile as a bird's. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm coming with you. I'm never leaving you again." At the hospital, as doctors worked to stabilize both mother And child, Theo paced the waiting room like a caged animal. Severe malnutrition, they said about Becca. Pneumonia and dehydration for Magnolia. Both were lucky to be alive. Lucky. The word mocked him. There was nothing lucky about any of this. His wife, his ex-wife, had been living on the streets with his daughter while he dined on lobster and felt sorry for himself. Mr. Holland. Dr. Martinez emerged from the emergency room, his expression grave. The patients are stable, but they'll need extended care. The little girl's pneumonia is serious, and the woman— He paused. When was the last time she had a proper meal? I don't know, Theo said hoarsely. I haven't seen them in 7 years. Hours later, when Becca finally woke up in the private room Theo had arranged, she found him sitting between their beds, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Theo? Her voice was barely a whisper. He looked up, and she saw devastation in his eyes, the complete destruction of a man who had finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. I kept our baby, Theo, she said, looking at Magnolia sleeping peacefully in the next bed. I kept her safe. Are you going to take her away from me too? Our baby, he repeated wonderingly. You were going to tell me that night, weren't you? When you said you had something to tell me. Becca nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I was so excited. I thought you'd be happy. I would have been, Theo said brokenly. I would have been over the moon. Becca, what have I done? What have I done to you both? You believed what you were told to believe, she said simply. But now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Theo stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing like ice in his veins. I'm going to destroy the people who did this to us, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve a second chance. Revenge won't bring back the years we lost, Baker said softly. No, Theo agreed, but justice might help us build something new. Chapter 8. The investigation begins. Present day. 1 week later, the penthouse guest wing had been transformed into a sanctuary of safety and comfort, but to Becca it felt like another kind of prison. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city. Plush carpets cushioned every step, and the refrigerator was stocked with more food than she and Magnolia had seen in months. Yet she moved through the space like a ghost, jumping at every sound, flinching whenever Theo appeared. You don't have to be afraid of me, he said quietly, finding her standing at the window watching Magnolia play in the building's private garden. 3 floors below, don't I? Baker's voice was hollow, aged beyond her years. You threw us away once, Theo. What's to stop you from doing it again when the novelty wears off? There's no one else, Theo said, moving closer but stopping when she visibly tensed. There hasn't been anyone since you. Becca turned to look at him then, really look at him. 4 years had carved lines around his eyes and added silver to his temples, but he was still devastatingly handsome. Still the man who had once made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. 4 years, Theo. 4 years while I was raising our daughter in poverty. Forgive me if I find that hard to believe. Believe it or not, it's the truth, he said. I tried, especially in the first few years, but every woman I met, they weren't you. I won't let you near Magnolia, she said, her voice deadly quiet. You can house us, feed us, clothe us. I'll accept your help because my daughter needs it. But I won't let you break her heart when you decide we're not worth the trouble again. The boundaries she set were agony for Theo. Watching his daughter from afar felt like torture, especially when he could see so much of himself in her mannerisms. Magnolia drew constantly, filling page after page with crayon pictures that Mrs. Patterson, the nanny, would discreetly leave where he could find them. Most of the drawings featured 3 figures, a woman with dark skin and sad eyes, a little girl with wild curls, and a man standing apart from them. In every picture, the man stood alone while the woman and child were together. Sometimes the man had tears falling from his blue eyes. Sometimes he was holding flowers he couldn't give them. The drawings broke Theo's heart. "She asks about you," Mrs. Patterson mentioned one evening. "The little one. She calls you the sad prince and wonders why you don't come to read her bedtime stories." "Her mother won't allow it," Theo replied. "Perhaps if you proved yourself trustworthy in small ways first." The child is wise beyond her years. She sees more than her mother realizes. That night, Theo lay awake, listening to the sounds from the guest wing, Becca's restless pacing, the soft murmur of her voice as she sang lullabies to Magnolia, the heart-wrenching sobs that came when she thought no one could hear. But when Magnolia's screams pierced the silence at 2 a.m., those boundaries became irrelevant. Theo found Becca sitting on the bed, holding their daughter, both of them crying. Magnolia was in the grip of a night terror, her small body rigid with fear. "The bad men are coming," Magnolia sobbed. "They're going to take Mommy away again." "It's just a dream, baby," Becca whispered, rocking her gently. "Mommy's here. You're safe." Without thinking, Theo stepped into the room. "Magnolia, it's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." At the sound of his voice, Magnolia's struggles ceased. She turned toward him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Are you real, or am I still dreaming?" "I'm real," Theo said softly, "and you're safe. No one is going to hurt you or your mummy, I promise. Will you stay until the monsters go away?" Theo looked at Becca, asking permission with his eyes. After a long moment, she nodded. He sat in the chair beside the bed, and Magnolia's breathing gradually returned to normal. "Tell me a story," she whispered. So Theo told her about a brave little princess who lived in a magical garden where roses bloomed all year round. And as he spoke, both his daughter and the woman he had never stopped loving finally fell asleep. The next morning, Theo called Dashiell Kane with new urgency, but tempered by realism about what an investigation could accomplish. "I need you to dig deeper," he said. "I need you to investigate my family starting 4 years ago. Bank records, phone logs, meeting schedules, everything. But I want you to understand this will take time. Mr. Holland, are you certain you want to go down this path? If your family was involved in framing your ex-wife, then they destroyed the most important thing in my life for their own selfish reasons," Theo interrupted, "and they cost me years of my daughter's life. Yes, I want to go down this path, but do it right. I want evidence that will hold up in court. Sir, this kind of investigation, we're talking about potentially criminal conspiracy, fraud, evidence tampering. Even with unlimited resources, I'm looking at 6 months minimum to build a solid case. Maybe a year, then take a year," Theo said firmly. "I've waited 4 years to know the truth. I can wait longer if it means getting justice." Dashiell's investigation began methodically. Financial forensics experts traced money flows through multiple shell companies. Technology specialists worked to recover deleted digital records. Former employees were interviewed carefully with offers of whistleblower protection. The work was slow and painstaking. Evangeline and Dorian had been careful, but not perfect. Gradually, a pattern emerged. 3 months into the investigation, the first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former Holland family accountant, now retired, came forward after reading about Baker's situation in a financial industry newsletter. "I always wondered about those payments," Elena Vasquez told Dashiell during their recorded interview. Mrs. Evangeline Holland insisted they be processed as consulting fees, but the amounts were too round, too convenient. $400,000 exactly to something called Crowley Family Services. No invoices, no contracts, just a direct payment. This led to the systematic search for Jasper Crowley, not the quick coincidence of the original story, but months of careful investigation. They traced him through Social Security records, employment history, and finally through his daughter's medical records at the Children's Hospital in Portland. The man's been living under his own name the whole time, Dashiell reported to Theo, 6 months after beginning the investigation. But he's been seeing a psychiatrist for severe depression and survivor's guilt. His therapist, with proper legal compulsions, confirmed he's been carrying a secret that's been destroying his mental
health.
I want to approach him carefully, Theo said. If he's as fragile as you say, we can't just ambush him. We need him coherent and willing to testify. The approach to Jasper Crowley took another month of careful planning. They had his psychiatrist contact him first, explaining that his secret was discovered and that confession might actually help his mental state. Then they arranged for victim advocacy counselors to be present during any interviews. When Theo finally met Jasper 8 months after beginning the investigation, it was in a controlled setting with lawyers and counselors present. "Mr. Holland," Jasper said quietly, his hands shaking despite medication for his anxiety, "I've been expecting this day for 4 years. I've wanted to confess so many times, but I was terrified they'd come after my daughter." "Who specifically threatened your daughter?" Dashiell asked, recording everything. "Mrs. Evangeline Holland and Mr. Dorian Holland. They had investigators following Rosalie for weeks after the payment, photos of her at school, at her doctor's appointments. The message was clear: stay quiet or she'd have an accident." This revelation explained why. Jasper had kept evidence but never used it. He hadn't been protecting himself. He'd been protecting his daughter from ongoing threats. The evidence Jasper produced was comprehensive: original photographs proving the doctored versions, bank records showing the exact payment structure, even audio recordings he'd made of conversations with Evangeline and Dorian as insurance against further threats to his daughter. "I kept everything because I knew they might try to silence me permanently," Jasper explained. "If anything happened to me, I wanted there to be a record of what they made me do." With Jasper's cooperation and evidence, Dashiell was able to trace the full scope of the conspiracy. Forensic document examiners, photographers hired through shell companies, even bribes to hotel staff who provided false testimony about room registrations. "This is a federal case now," Dashiell told Theo 9 months after beginning the investigation. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, extortion. The FBI will want to build their own case, which means another 6 months minimum before any arrests. And Baker and Magnolia are safe during this time. Completely. We've documented everything. If anything happens to them or to Jasper's family now, the evidence clearly points to your family as the source." As the investigation moved into its final phases, Theo realized that justice would be slow but thorough. The days of instant gratification were over, but the truth, when it finally emerged, would be unshakable. "I always wondered about those payments," Eleanor Vasquez told Dashiell during their recorded interview. "Mrs. Evangeline Holland insisted they be processed as consulting fees, but the amounts were too round, too convenient, $400,000 exactly, to something called Crowley Family Services. No invoices, no contracts, just a direct payment. This led to the systematic search for Jasper Crowley. Not the quick coincidence of the original story, but months of careful investigation. They traced him through Social Security records, employment history, and finally through his daughter's medical records at the Children's Hospital in Portland. "The man's been living under his own name the whole time," Dashiell reported to Theo, 6 months after beginning the investigation. "But he's been seeing a psychiatrist for severe depression and survivor's guilt. His therapist, with proper legal compulsions, confirmed he's been carrying a secret that's been destroying his mental health." "I want to approach him carefully," Theo said. "If he's as fragile as you say, we can't just ambush him. We need him coherent and willing to testify." The approach to Jasper Crowley took another month of careful planning. They had his psychiatrist Contact him first, explaining that his secret was discovered and that confession might actually help his mental state. Then they arranged for victim advocacy counselors to be present during any interviews. When Theo finally met Jasper, 8 months after beginning the investigation, it was in a controlled setting with lawyers and counselors present. "Mr. Holland," Jasper said quietly, his hands shaking despite medication for his anxiety. "I've been expecting this day for 4 years. I've wanted to confess so many times, but I was terrified they'd come after my daughter." "Who specifically threatened your daughter?" Dashiell asked, recording everything. "Mrs. Evangeline Holland and Mr. Dorian Holland. They had investigators following Rosalie for weeks after the payment, photos of her at school, at her doctor's appointments. The message was clear: stay quiet or she'd have an accident." This revelation explained why. Jasper had kept evidence but never used it. He hadn't been protecting himself. He'd been protecting his daughter from ongoing threats. The evidence Jasper produced was comprehensive. Original photographs proving the doctored versions, bank records showing the exact payment structure, even audio recordings he'd made of conversations with Evangeline and Dorian as insurance against further threats to his daughter. "I kept everything because I knew they might try to silence me permanently," Jasper explained. "If anything happened to me, I wanted there to be a record of what they made me do." With Jasper's cooperation and evidence, Dashiell was able to trace the full scope of the conspiracy. Forensic document examiners, photographers hired through shell companies, even bribes to hotel staff who provided false testimony about room registrations. "This is a federal case now," Dashiell told Theo 9 months after beginning the investigation. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, extortion. The FBI will want to build their own case, which means another 6 months minimum before any arrests. And Becca and Magnolia are safe during this time. Completely. We've documented everything. If anything happens to them or to Jasper's family now, the evidence clearly points to your family as the source." As the investigation moved into its final phases, Theo realized that justice would be slow but thorough. The days of instant gratification were over, but the truth, when it finally emerged, would be unshakable. He thought about Magnolia's latest drawing, the one where the prince was finally walking toward the castle instead of standing alone. Sometimes the journey toward truth took longer than anyone wanted, but it was still worth taking. The reckoning was coming. And this time it would be built on evidence so solid that no amount of money or influence could tear it down. Chapter 9. Truth and Vengeance. Present day, 18 months after investigation began. The federal courthouse in Manhattan was a fortress of justice, its marble columns standing witness to the end of a conspiracy that had taken 2 years to fully unravel. Theo Holland sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching as FBI agents escorted his mother and brother into the courtroom in handcuffs. The investigation had been exhaustive. What began with Dashiell Kane's financial forensics had expanded into a federal task force involving wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering charges. The Holland family's racist conspiracy had violated multiple federal laws, and the Department of Justice had built an airtight case. The defendants, Evangeline Marie Holland and Dorian Charles Holland, have been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, witness tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Martinez, announced to the packed courtroom. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records traced through 5 different shell companies, showing systematic payments to co-conspirators. Digital forensics had recovered deleted emails detailing the racist motivations behind the frame job. Handwriting analysis had proven the forged love letters. Most damning of all, Jasper Crowley's testimony, given under immunity and corroborated by physical evidence, had exposed every detail of the conspiracy. Evangeline Holland, now 73, sat at the defense table, with the rigid posture of someone who refused to show weakness even in defeat. Her expensive legal team had tried every possible defense, claiming Jasper was mentally unstable, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, even attempting to characterize the conspiracy as a family intervention rather than criminal fraud. None of it worked against federal prosecutors with unlimited resources and ironclad evidence. Your Honor, AUSA Martinez addressed Judge Catherine Morrison. The evidence shows a systematic campaign of fraud designed to destroy an interracial marriage through fabricated evidence, bribery, and ongoing threats against witnesses. This was not a family dispute. This was a criminal conspiracy motivated by racial hatred. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, with devastating testimony from multiple witnesses. Jasper Crowley had spent 2 days on the stand, describing in detail how Evangeline and Dorian had exploited his daughter's illness to force him into perjury. Document experts had explained how sophisticated the forged evidence was. Former employees had testified about the Holland family's racist statements and behavior patterns, but the most powerful testimony had come from an unexpected source: Quinten Ashworth. Facing his own federal charges for fraud and abandonment, Quinten had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed another layer of the conspiracy: how Evangeline Holland had actually contacted him after Becca's marriage, offering money to neutralize her if she ever tried to reconcile with Theo. Mrs. Holland told me that if Becca ever approached their family again, I should make sure she disappeared permanently, Quinten testified, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his admission. She offered me $2 million to ensure the problem was solved permanently. This revelation had shocked even federal prosecutors, elevating the charges to include solicitation of murder, though the statute of limitations prevented prosecution for that specific crime. Now, 18 months after Dashiell Kane had first begun investigating financial irregularities, justice was finally being served. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman replied, "on the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you find? Guilty. On the charge of wire fraud? Guilty. On the charge of mail fraud? Guilty." The verdicts continued for 27 separate counts. Guilty on all charges for both defendants. Evangeline Holland's composure finally cracked when the judge announced the sentencing range: 15 to 20 years in federal prison for each defendant, with no possibility of parole. At 73 and 68 respectively, both Evangeline and Dorian were facing what amounted to life sentences. This court finds that the defendants engaged in a sophisticated conspiracy motivated by racial hatred, Judge Morrison declared during sentencing 3 weeks later. They corrupted the justice system, destroyed innocent lives, and showed no remorse for their actions. The sentences imposed today reflect the seriousness of these crimes and send a clear message that justice applies to everyone, regardless of wealth or social status. Evangeline Holland was sentenced to 18 years. In federal prison, Dorian received 15 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution totaling $4.7 million to Becca and Magnolia for damages, lost income, and emotional suffering. But the criminal convictions were only the beginning. The civil justice system moved more quickly once criminal guilt was established. The Holland family's business empire faced systematic dismantling. Federal asset forfeiture laws allowed the government to seize assets used in the commission of crimes. The family's trust funds were liquidated to pay restitution. The Manhattan estate, where Theo and Becca had lived, was sold, with proceeds going to organizations fighting racism and supporting homeless families. Theo, who had cooperated fully with federal investigators and testified against his own family, retained control of Holland Enterprises, but restructured it completely. The company's board was diversified, its hiring practices were overhauled, and a significant portion of its profits were directed toward racial justice initiatives. "I want to be clear," Theo said at a press conference following the sentencing. "My family's crimes were motivated by racism, pure and simple. No amount of money or prison time can undo the damage they caused, but we can use their criminal enterprise to fund positive change." The press conference was also where Theo publicly acknowledged Magnolia as his daughter and announced his engagement to Becca, though both revelations were carefully planned to avoid media circus around a 4-year-old child. "DNA tests have confirmed that Magnolia is my biological daughter," Theo said simply. "The conspiracy to frame her mother cost me 4 years of my daughter's life. We're focused now on healing and moving forward as a family." In a separate but related case, Quinton Ashworth pleaded guilty to fraud, child abandonment, and conspiracy charges. His cooperation with federal prosecutors earned him a reduced sentence of 5 years in federal prison, but he would also face civil liability for his treatment of Becca and Magnolia. The legal proceedings had taken 2 years from start to finish, but they resulted in complete vindication for Becca and justice for everyone involved in the conspiracy. As Theo watched his mother and brother being led away in shackles, he felt not triumph but exhaustion. Justice had been served, but it couldn't return the lost years or heal the wounds that had been inflicted. Outside the courthouse, Becca waited with Magnolia, now 5 years old and finally old enough to understand that the bad people who had hurt her family were going to prison. "Are they really gone forever?" Magnolia asked, holding her father's hand as they walked down the courthouse steps. "For a very long time, sweetheart," Theo replied. "Long enough for you to grow up safe and happy." "Good," Magnolia said with the fierce determination she had inherited from both parents. "They were mean to Mommy, and people who are mean to my Mommy should go to jail." As they drove home together, truly together for the first time in 5 years, Theo reflected on how long the journey to justice had taken. 2 years of investigation and trials, millions of dollars in legal fees, and the complete destruction of his family legacy. But watching Becca smile as Magnolia chattered about her upcoming 5th birthday party, Theo knew it had all been worth it. Justice was slow, but it was thorough, and sometimes that was enough. Chapter 10. Love Reborn. Present day. 6 months later. Healing, Baker discovered, was not a straight line drawn from broken to whole. Some days she woke up feeling strong enough to face the world, her trust in Theo growing like new grass after a forest fire. Other days, she found herself paralyzed in the grocery store, overwhelmed by choices when for years she had been grateful for whatever food she could find. "Mommy?" Magnolia's voice was gentle, wise beyond her 3 years. "Are you having a scared day?" Becca looked down at her daughter, this miracle child who had inherited not just Theo's blue eyes, but his intuitive understanding of human emotion. After months of proper nutrition and medical care, Magnolia had blossomed. Her cheeks were round and pink, her curls bounced with vitality. "A little bit, sweetheart," Becca admitted. "Should we call Theo? He always knows how to make the scared feelings go away." The fact that her daughter now called him Theo instead of Prince Theo felt like progress. Small steps, Dr. Sarah Chen had told them. Healing happened in small steps. "Maybe we should," Beaker agreed, pulling out her phone. Theo answered on the first ring. "Becca, is everything okay?" "We're having a moment at the grocery store," she said. "Too many choices?" 17 different types of oatmeal, Theo. When we were before, I used to steal packets from hotel lobbies and feel like we'd won the lottery." "I'll be right there." 20 minutes later, Theo appeared in the cereal aisle looking ridiculously out of place in his expensive suit, but he didn't care about the stares. His only focus was on Becca and Magnolia. "Hey," he said softly, crouching down to their level. How about we make this simple? Magnolia, what's your favorite kind of oatmeal? The kind with dinosaur eggs that hatch when you add hot water, Magnolia exclaimed. Dinosaur eggs it is, Theo said solemnly, and maybe some plain oatmeal for Mommy. The casual way he handled the crisis made Baker's chest warm. Progress, she thought. Small steps toward trusting love again. That evening, their cooking experiment turned into a flour fight that left all three of them covered in white powder and laughing. Watching Theo clean up the mess, his expensive suit ruined, but his face glowing with joy, Becca felt something shift inside her. Not quite trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. You don't have to do that, she said, taking the paper towels from him. Nothing more important than this, Theo replied, meeting her eyes. Nothing more important than being here with you and Magnolia. The board of directors might disagree. The board of directors can learn to live with disappointment. His voice carried the authority of a man who had restructured his entire life around different priorities. I missed 3 years of my daughter's life, Becca. I'm not missing anymore. That night, after Magnolia was asleep, Becca found Theo in his study staring at a photo from their wedding day. She had been looking for him to say goodnight, a small ritual they had established. Regrets? She asked softly. Every day, he admitted, but not about loving you, never about loving you, only about being too weak to fight for that love when it mattered most. Becca sat down across from him. I used to dream about this conversation, about you realizing you'd made a mistake and coming to find us. But in my dreams, you always found us right away. If I could go back, but you can't, Becca interrupted gently. Neither of us can. The question is, what do we do with the life we have left? It was the first time she had spoken about a future that included him, and Theo felt hope bloom in his chest. The turning point came 3 weeks later. Magnolia had been having nightmares, and despite Baker's efforts, their daughter couldn't be consoled. I want Theo, Magnolia sobbed. He makes the monsters go away. Becca found Theo in his office, working on contracts for a foundation in Magnolia's name. She wants you, Becca said simply. She's having nightmares, and she wants her... The word father hung unspoken between them. Theo followed Becca to Magnolia's room, where their daughter sat clutching her stuffed elephant. Theo! Magnolia's face lit up despite her tears. I dreamed the bad people took you away too. Hey, little princess, Theo said, settling into the chair beside her bed. No bad people are taking anyone away. You're safe, Mommy's safe, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise, I promise, Theo said solemnly. Cross my heart and hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Magnolia giggled, then grew serious. Will you be my real daddy? Not the mean man who left us, but a daddy who stays forever. The question hung in the air. Theo looked at Becca, who was standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. If Mommy says it's okay, Theo said carefully, I would be honored to be your real daddy. Mommy? Magnolia turned to Becca with hopeful eyes. Can Theo be my daddy? Please. Becca wiped her tears and stepped into the room. What do you think, sweetheart? Do you really want him to be your daddy? Forever and always, Magnolia said, firmly, even when I'm grown up. Then yes, Becca whispered, he can be your daddy. Theo's control finally broke. He gathered Magnolia in his arms and held her close, tears streaming down his face. Forever and always, little princess, he whispered into her hair. Nothing in this world could make me leave you and your mommy again. 3 months later, Becca's art gallery opened to critical acclaim. Survival stories featured paintings she had created during their homeless years, raw, heartbreaking pieces that told the story of love persisting through hardship. The centerpiece was Hope in the Darkness, Magnolia sleeping peacefully in a cardboard box, surrounded by shadows. but with light illuminating her face. Beside it hung The Prince Returns, Theo kneeling before Magnolia in the hospital, his hands outstretched in love. "You've turned pain into beauty," Theo said, standing beside her as patrons moved through the gallery. "You've given meaning to suffering?" "Art is supposed to make people feel," Becca replied. "If these pieces help one homeless mother feel less alone, then the pain served a purpose." The gallery represented more than artistic success. It was proof of Becca's independence. Theo had provided startup funds, but the vision was entirely hers. The proposal came in the most perfect place, the children's hospital where Magnolia had been born. Theo had donated millions to build a new NICU wing, and tonight was the dedication ceremony. "This is where our miracle began," Theo said softly, taking her hands as Magnolia played nearby. "This is where our daughter fought her first battle and won. This is where I want our new beginning to start." "Theo, I know I don't deserve a second chance," he continued, his voice breaking. "I know I failed you when you needed me most. I know I can't give you back the years we lost, but I can promise you that every day for the rest of my life, I will choose you. I will choose us." He didn't get down on one knee. Instead, he kept holding her hands, looking into her eyes with hope. "Becca McDonough Holland, will you marry me again? Will you let me prove that love can heal even the deepest wounds?" The ring was simple, not the massive diamond of their first engagement, but a vintage piece with 3 small stones representing past, present, and future. "I'm scared," Becca admitted. "I'm terrified of trusting you again." "I know," Theo said. "I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. And if the world tries to tear us apart again, then we'll face it together," Theo said firmly. "No lies, no secrets, no choosing other people's opinions. Over our love." Bakar looked at their daughter, who had abandoned her toys and was watching them with bright eyes. She thought about the long journey they had traveled. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you, but on one condition. Anything. We do this right this time. We face everything together, the good, the bad, the impossible." "I promise," Theo said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "Together, always together." "Are you getting married again?" Magnolia asked, bouncing with excitement. "Can I be the flower girl?" "You can wear the most beautiful princess dress in the world," Baker laughed, gathering her daughter into their embrace, "because you're the most important princess at this wedding." Leishishia. Epilogue, 5 years later. The garden behind their new home was alive with children's laughter. Magnolia, now 8, pushed her little brother Phoenix on the swing while Theo and Becca worked in the rose garden that had become their sanctuary. "Hiya, Maggie!" 4-year-old Phoenix squealed. "I want to touch the clouds." "Careful, little prince," Magnolia cautioned, with the protective instincts of an older sister. "We don't want you to fall." Becca smiled, her hands deep in soil where roses bloomed in every color. These weren't the same roses from their first garden. Those had been lost. But these new roses were stronger, planted in soil enriched by experience. "Do you think we got our happy ending?" she asked Theo. Theo paused, looking at his wife and their children playing in the golden afternoon light. "No, my love," he said, reaching over to touch her dirt-stained hand. "I think we're just beginning." Behind them, their house stood welcoming, its windows reflecting the setting sun, like promises kept. Inside, the walls were lined with Baker's paintings, not just the survival pieces, but new works that spoke of joy and family and second chances. The gallery had expanded to 3 locations, showcasing artists who had overcome trauma. Theo's foundation had helped thousands of homeless families, giving him a way to honor the suffering he had caused and the strength his wife and daughter had shown. "Mommy, Daddy!" Magnolia called. "Phoenix wants to hear the story again." "Which story?" Becca called back. "The true one, the one where they get separated but find each other again." Theo and Becca exchanged a look full of shared history and hard-won wisdom. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messier, more painful, more real, but it was theirs, and it was true. "Come here, little ones," Becca said, settling onto the garden bench. "Let me tell you about a love that was strong enough to survive the worst that people could do to it, and how it grew back even stronger than before." As the sun set over their garden and their children gathered close, Becca began the story again. The real story about how love could be lost and found, broken and healed, destroyed and reborn. And in the growing twilight, surrounded by roses and laughter and the possibility of forever, two people who had learned that happy endings were not gifts but achievements, held each other close and marveled at the beautiful life they had built from the ashes of their dreams.